Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the candor of Ms. Luther, just identifying the cumbersome nature of what this will employ on our workforce. I have a question for Mr. Hecker, and this has to do with just the realistic impact that an ETS would really have. So, Mr. Hecker, you stated that a recent survey from Society of Human Resource Management found a whopping 90% of employers believe it will be somewhat or very challenging to implement the OSHA ETS, and 89% believe they will lose workers as a result of that. And so just from a realistic standpoint here, what are you hearing about the potential impact of this ETS on workforce and the ability to retain that workforce?
Thank you, Ranking Member Fulcher. Yeah, from client counseling, we know it's already a tight labor market, and people are having difficulty retaining or onboarding staff. And I can look at my social media feeds and see people reaching out saying, if you know anyone, I'm looking. I had a client conversation recently where the client said, I'm not joking. This may sound like I'm joking, but I cannot lose one person. I have over 300 openings, and I can't fill them. So if I lose a person, it's going to have real impacts on my operations. And I think we'll see things like that. There was just a discussion of accommodations. I think most employers are taking those seriously and looking at them and going through the individual interactive process. I think it's hard to dismiss a batch of accommodations out of hand. So that process, standing that up, would be quite difficult if you're not used to the volume. Some smaller businesses in the 100 to 500 number range of employees, they may not have the HR support or the legal department or the compliance department to stand this up quickly, and they need time. OSHA determined not to take stakeholder input here in this emergency temporary standard process. And typically, under the APA, the Administrative Procedure Act, you would have notice and comment rulemaking that would account for stakeholder input, and we would have a better idea, Ranking Member Fulcher, about what really concerns employers on the ground, and OSHA would be able to consider that. They didn't do that here. And the OIRA stakeholder meetings, I think there have been more than 70. Unfortunately, you fly blind in those. Nobody has the text of this ETS yet, at least in the regulated community. OSHA has it, OIRA has it. But beyond that, we don't know what's in it. So it's really hard to determine, what testing allocation, the cost of testing allocation will be, what the paid time off requirements will be.
Right.
We just don't know. And those are all practical impacts on employers.
Thank you, Mr. Hecker. I've got just a couple minutes left, and I have a couple more questions here. This one in regard to test costs. There's likely going to be a provision for testing here. And there are valid concerns that implementation of the ETS would overwhelm some of that testing capacity. Have you heard anything from employers about the availability and the cost of testing kits? And what will the impact of this be and the average cost of these tests, and who picks up the bill for them?
Yeah, anecdotally, Ranking Member Fulcher, I have heard some concern about the availability of testing and the cost. I had a client suggest that it was going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for them if it's allocated to employers. Again, we don't know. Typically, throughout the pandemic, I think costs have tended to be allocated to employers rather than employees. Even if there may be some justification for shifting that here, I don't know that anyone's optimistic on the employer side that that's going to happen. But yeah, it's another question we don't know is there's time to reach full vaccination. In the meantime, while people are getting, those who choose to be vaccinated, while they're getting vaccinated, well, they need to undergo weekly testing as well until they reach that full vaccination. So you may have to roll out a testing program even if the vast majority of your vaccine, your employees choose to be vaccinated. I think that's something that we haven't heard much from OSHA on, and personally, I'm curious about whether those who choose to become vaccinated will need to test in the meantime. We know that those who choose testing option will be subject to it weekly at least, and there will be real costs, and we could stretch the supply chain even further. Particularly, we also don't know what kind of tests will be accepted under the reg, whether it'll be rapid or something
Okay.
more.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hecker. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much.